Hello, hello, it is Halloween 2024 to date this video for the future. Ooh, spooky, furry knockers. Yeah, it's very scary to a specific kind of person. People love to combine the idea of fear and arousal. Just look at all those TV ghosts that crawl through the television and then do stuff to you. Those are pretty popular. Anyways, there was a major studio leak recently from Gamefreak's offices. Gamefreak, they're the people that make Pokemon, if you don't know. Now, data was stolen from them back in August, and it took a while to compile, and then a hacker on Discord, I believe, began to release 1 terabyte worth of data back in October via the Centro Leaks Twitter account, or excuse me, the X account. Have you seen Elon jumping up and down on stage to try to form an X with his hands? What a fucking tool. Anyways, I briefly wanted to talk about that. To that end, I use the poll feature on YouTube to create engagement. To ask you guys what Pokemon you wanted for me to draw. For unspecified reasons. I did not specify why. I simply listed 4 choices and then asked which of the 4 you would want me to draw. In other words, the consequences are entirely yours. Now, I selected these 4 because they are the most featured Pokemon, you could say. Now, people assume that the number 1 most featured Pokemon must assuredly be Vaporeon because of the meme, but it's actually number 9. And I think it actually used to be much lower pre-meme. Now, compatibility aside, the number 1 slot goes to Gardevoir, followed by Lopunny, and then apparently Broxton, and then Glaceon. So those were my choices. And if you were wondering, Vaporeon actually is number 9. Zoroark is number 5. Corellia is a little bit concerning. That's number 6. Meletta, which I think is that little singing legendary Pokemon, the one that's supposed to look like a pop idol. And then Sylveon at number 8. Serena at number 10, which is not really surprising considering it has a magnificently large everything. And on a personal note, Delphox is number 11, which I mentioned just because apparently I became known as the Delphox guy for a while. Now, funny, I was actually watching a video yesterday on the worst starter Pokemon for competitive play, and Delphox is actually number 3 or 4, which doesn't surprise me because whenever I was playing Y, I think that's the right one, it did not surprise me at all. I noticed that her stats were quite bad, and it was a her. Now, if this opening is already making you uncomfortable, then this is the video for you. Or if you're excited, this is the video for you. Lopunny in the first few seconds was at a 32% or so on the poll whenever I launched it, and it never went down. It kind of just consistently stayed at the exact same rate the entire way through. The final results were Lopunny at 39%, Gardevoir at 26%, Broxton at 19%, and Glaceon at 16%, if you were wondering. Now, as a heads up, my drawing here will focus on an actual, more humanized female body, which kind of loops into what the video is going to be about. Because the actual model for Lopunny, if you actually remember what it looks like, is kind of horrific looking. It's sort of shaped like a teardrop, or just a really loose bag full of a lot of liquid that someone's holding onto, like a balloon. It doesn't look nice. It really doesn't. Which kind of makes you wonder why it's so popular, but then again, that's what this video is about, is people projecting things onto the creatures, and what that entails, and so on. Now, popularity for Pokemon in this respect, you know, the most featured respect, I should say, it hinges a lot on this sort of pareidolia sort of related attraction that people have to them. If you don't know, pareidolia is the human eye basically seeing faces and things. If you've ever looked down at the ground and see like a little face looking back at you from the texture of some tiles or something, that's what pareidolia is. Or you look up at a cloud and you see an image or something. It's that, the human capacity to be able to see patterns and things. As I have loved to mention in the past, you can put bedroom eyes as a drawing on pretty much anything, and suddenly it's arousing. Not really, but you know, quote-unquote arousing. And if you put a specific shape, like the proportionality of like the female shape, or even a male shape, it kind of depends what you're going for, onto pretty much anything, you can create that proper ratio that triggers the human brain to go, oh, attraction. And you'll, of course, shake your head and be like, wait, what? That's like a burlap sack. Why does my brain do that for like a split second? It's just how our brains work. We're weird little guys. Now, the human mind fills in gaps pretty easily. So, when it comes to Pokemon, some people are really aghast at this, and some people just interpret this as just being a joke, and there are other people that are pretty into it. And because I'm Professor Harkness, some people want to know more, so that's what this video is going to be about. I will go over the fictional stories that came out that were cut content that people have been reacting to, and I will talk a little about those and so on. Alright. So in true fashion, the weird stuff got the big news. That's the thing that people are really wanting to talk about. But actually, as far as the leak is concerned, there was a massive amount of data that was released that involves things like unreleased design concepts, the concept for new gameplay features, map editors, a new engine that they chose not to go through with, I think, just all sorts of things. They had an idea for real regions in the real world, where Pokemon only evolve or can be captured in very specific real countries that are based on location data on your device. Pokemon already has a lot of annoying mechanics like that to prevent you from getting the things that you want. I don't think that would have been received very well, so you can see why things like that got dropped. I also saw that there was a mechanic thought up where a Pokemon that you release may come back already evolved, which I don't know what the intention of that was, but in my head it just gives me the impression of a little kid releasing something that he doesn't want back into the wild, and then it comes back jacked and ready for revenge. Fuck you, Billy. Also, the idea of Pokemon patterns and colors being randomized. I can see why they don't do that. I've always wanted that concept, but I can see why they didn't do it. It's mentioned in one of the leaks that the Tyranitar first evolution, I forget what it's called, it's very dark in comparison to Tyranitar, which is very red looking. It had its color changed in production in order to avoid looking like a Digimon. And I can't remember that thing's name. Agumon? No. It's not Agumon. I can't remember. It's from Tamers, I think. You guys will certainly know better than I. They were probably afraid of the idea of employing things like patterns and randomized colors and things, because the randomization could potentially get them in trouble somehow, with that Tyranitar example. Potentially. I personally have always loved the idea of having randomized patterns and, colors and things like that. More customization to the individual Pokemon that you got. But, it's probably one of those things that they'll never actually do. And if it was up to me, I would be able to, choose individual color zones and change each individual color and just... Maybe it's for the best that I'm not a Pokemon lead designer. I would really get into the weeds with the more aesthetic focus. And I would probably even get rid of... for balancing purposes, I would probably just focus on individual roles as far as stats go that are pre-made and very balanced, as opposed to trying to make hundreds, thousands of Pokemon designs that are all individually balanced in some effort to try to make sure that they're all competitive with one another. But that's just me. Point being, the leak itself was total and dramatically bad. This was a massive amount of information that never should have been as unsecure as it was. For example, as the big XY guy, the "it's been 3,000 years" guy from, the picture, really tall guy who left a flower. He used to be the Team Flare leader / main bad guy, and some people are like, whoa, it's crazy. For me, whenever I look at that, I don't care. That doesn't mean anything to me. But, the leak has been all over the place. All sorts of information got released. It's not just this weird, Professor Harkness style stuff. The worst thing that probably got released is that the source code for the builds of X and Y and Arceus all got leaked. So people have gotten those up and running, I think. And in addition, concepts for games that never existed also got released. And the the actual hacker on Discord, I believe, claimed that they have a unreleased build of something called Pokemon Legends Z to A. But there's been no evidence of it yet beyond him just claiming that he has it. Anyways, if not for the weird fiction, the leak probably would have come and gone for most people. Some people would really be, diving into it. But for most people, it probably wouldn't really register with them too much. It's just another leak in this era where personal information and business stuff is getting leaked left and right anyways. But I wanted to go over some of the stories that I found. And it was really hard to find some of them because one or two of them are the notably really weird ones and the ones that are getting the most coverage. And search results. Whenever you try to search for something, the notable stuff really compresses down all the actual information to the point where you can barely find anything. So I had to sift through a lot of annoying modern YouTubers who have lots of fast, noisy edits, and they're making soy jack faces at the camera. Whoa, guys, I can't believe they did this. And it's just that shit. So I kind of just gave up on that and did a more coherent search in text form. Anyways. So there's actually quite a few of them, and there's even more of them that have not been translated yet. So finding a comprehensive list is pretty hard. Some stories supposedly aren't translated that accurately either, but either way, I wanted to synopsize a few of them. As a result, I sort of anticipate that the majority of this video will probably be me just reiterating what the stories are, and then trying to talk about them a little bit towards the tail end of each story. So on this one, I will try to earmark where the stories begin and end in the timeline. Take care of that, future Eli. No problem, past Eli. And for the sake of my own sanity, I will not be reading them word per word. I will be synopsizing them. Because boy howdy, some of them just go and go. Okay, story number 1 that I've chosen to go over is the Slakoth Vigoroth or Slaking story. Now, if you don't know, a Slakoth is basically a Pokemon. It's a little bitty sloth. Vigoroth is sort of the in-between. It's the mid-form. It looks sort of like a sloth combined with a chimp, I guess. And a Slaking is basically just a gorilla. A particularly ugly-looking gorilla. You can go look at pictures of all these Pokemon if you want. So, the gist of this story is that some human women go out into the woods as a hobby and kill Slakoth for no reason. Just for fun. They specifically crush their eyes and cut off their ears. So already, what the fuck? So the main character, the lady, is going out here alone, messing with Slakoth one day, when she manages to injure herself by twisting her ankle or something, I believe, and is abducted by a Vigoroth. Now she wakes up in a part of the forest that she doesn't recognize that's absolutely full of them. They're either injured or dead. Some of them are hanging down from the treetops as corpses, and they're being thrown into the lake. As she's looking around, she sees a Slaking that has a clipped ear, which is similar to the one that abducted her in the first place, the Vigoroth that abducted her. So I guess at some point it evolved into this new form. So she realizes that that was the thing that abducted her. And she wakes up again afterwards, and she's back near her village. Afterwards, she gives birth to a Slakoth. Not a human baby, but a Slakoth specifically. She tries to conceal it, for obvious reasons, and her friends that she used to run around killing Slakoth with are concerned that she hasn't shown up in a while, so they go visit her at her home. They find the Slakoth outside, I guess it was playing or something, and they kill it for fun, because that's just what they do. The little group of psychopathic ladies take the corpse of the Slakoth to the woman's house, since they're right outside, and this horrifies the mother, because she realizes that it's her child. So she takes the baby's corpse and races into the woods as her friends try to follow her. They find out where this lake is, and they see her dive into it and vanish. So she presumably dies with her child. As a result of this, all of her friends repent what they've been doing, and they all become friends with the Pokemon afterwards. And this is the story. So with story number 1, you can probably see through demonstration why people were upset with some of these fictional stories that came out. We immediately open up with a bunch of women torturing other creatures, and an implied assault that results in a child. Or it could be interpreted as being more mystical, I suppose, in the sense that she simply woke up carrying a child. But I don't get that impression. But something to note from this story is that she's carrying an actual Slakoth as a child. She's not carrying a human baby, it's a Slakoth, just literally a Slakoth, which I want you to remember for later just because sort of the inverse ends up happening in other stories. Now, I'm not going to have a full reaction to all these stories in a row, because a lot of the concepts are going to fit together in a way that I'm going to try to unify later. So let's move on to the next one, which is a story about Sharpedo. Now, in this story about Sharpedo, which is a silly-looking little shark thing that's sort of truncated, looks like half a shark and also sort of a bullet. It's a weird little guy. It is so short that I will, in this one case, just read it instead of synopsizing it. This is the text that was translated by the hacker. In places where there are rules and order, and these things are valued, only important people are allowed to capture Sharpedo. Even when captured, Sharpedo are treated with care, brought back to land, their fins cut and sold at a high price, and every part of the fish is eaten. Even the bones are treated carefully, respectfully, and with love. In such places, the lives of many Sharpedo are not lost unnecessarily, and valuable things are treated as valuable. In the current capitalistic world, which lacks rules and order, people on massive ships capture more Sharpedo than needed, cutting off their fins and throwing them back into the sea while still alive. This way they procure them in large quantities and sell them cheaply. This is meritocracy. What's wrong with the strong killing the weak? The former represents many places and values in the Pokemon world. This time, however, Team Galactic holds the latter worldview. In other words, they represent the excessive and extreme aspects of the real world. That's the entirety of the text. I take it that some of that is actually internal, in terms of how they want to depict Team Galactic and the game that they're from. Team Galactic, if I remember correctly, is from the Diamond and Pearl games, and I think also Platinum. Obviously a very on-the-nose story about people making real shark fin soup, an actual thing. People killing endangered animals because of delicacies or superstitions about making their pee-pees bigger or whatever. It is an issue everywhere in the world, in some form or another. It's especially prevalent in Asia, especially China, if I remember correctly, so it's obviously a criticism of that. But I wanted to point out here that you can see how they're trying to loop in real-world politics in addition to this idea that people need to be living in concert with nature itself. And it's okay to kill things as long as you are respecting them. And in the case of this one game story, it's about how excess is the difference between it being evil versus good. So, while that story is not on the brand of the things people have been outraged by or anything like that, I wanted a demonstration of what the Fables are going for in terms of the thematics. Now, moving on, we have the Rapidash story. And in the Rapidash story, it begins with two men living by a lake. One lives on the west side, and one lives on the east side. The west man is described as not being very skilled, but he lives by a hunting code, whereas the east man is described as being very skilled as a hunter, but he neglects the code. Now, the west man was out hunting one day and saw a Rapidash on the plains, and he was about to kill it. And if you don't know, a Rapidash is basically just a horse. Has, I think, a flaming mane. It's made of fire. And as he was about to kill it, the Rapidash opened its mouth and started to speak. And it told him that there were too few of them left, and it had recently had children, I think, because the way that it's phrased is quite unusual. And if it died, they would not exist in the region anymore. So the Westman agreed not to harm the Rapidash, but still wanted its beautiful mane for himself. So he asked the Rapidash to become his wife. You know, naturally, as one does. And the horse agreed, presumably with bedroom eyes. So it took him to a place that had a lot of Ponytas and Rapidashes. And it introduced the little ones, the Ponytas, as its children, and as a result the humans knew children as well. And it described the females as his sister-in-laws, and it said that the males are her other husbands. And it said also that the Westman could hunt her other husbands if he wanted to. Nice. Disposable co-husbands. It said, if you treat them with care, they will not die. I'm not sure if that means that their spirits return, or literally she's saying don't overhunt them. It's not exactly clear, and that's sort of the point. Anyways, the Eastman, who hasn't done anything yet, he's the one that was very skilled, but he didn't have good morals. The Eastman later kills a Ponyta, one of the little ones. And afterwards he finds a female Rapidash and kills her after ignoring what she was trying to tell him. In other words, he came upon the same situation where he was about to kill one, and then it tried to say don't do this, but instead he just ignores it and kills it. So, no wife for him. No horse wife for this guy. He plans to show off the mane that he gets from this Rapidash to the Westman, so he begins walking around the lake, but he gets tired and decides to rest by a tree. Then the couple, the Westman and his horse, see this guy from a distance sitting under the tree, but it looks just like a resting Rapidash. Now, the wife Rapidash claims that this is a male Rapidash that has no children, and as a result, he can hunt it without being worried about it. So the Westman takes his shot and ends up killing the Eastman, and he walks up to what he believes is the horse and then realizes what he's done. The Rapidash wife then tells him that he can take the mane that the Eastman had, that he had harvested, and when he hunts Rapidash in the future, the Westman should remember the rules that she has laid down for him. And then afterwards, she just leaves and returns to the plains, and presumably their marriage as it was is over. So, a little weird, but you can see what they're going for. The idea is they are trying to, the wilderness itself is trying to establish for the humans, these are the rules of hunting. It is okay for us to die, this is part of the natural order of things. But there are still rules, and you have to abide by them. And if you don't abide by them, then there will be consequences. Also, if you're wondering how exactly did someone harvest the mane of an animal whose mane is made of fire, I don't know. I don't know. Also, from the way that the story was worded, this seems to have all taken place over a period of like 1 or 2 weeks. So, I guess he got an annulment from the horse. I don't know. Such mysterious creatures, these Pokemon. Alright, this brings us to the Ursaring story. A Ursaring is basically just a big bear that has a ring on its chest. It's one of those Pokemon. Now, this story has a really complicated opening that almost feels like it's someone trying to set the mood like you're watching a movie, so I'm just going to skip a lot of that. Basically, the people of the East, in the distant past, would not only marry Pokemon, but relied on them for sustenance. So we had this idea again, that they are intermarrying with the life outside of humanity, but also they still rely on them as far as like food and everything goes. And they worshipped a god called Ea, E-A, which is the god of time, and it's also associated with the moon. Now, people in the West were more industrious, and they worshipped a god called Ea, spelled I-A. I guess Ea and Aya, which is the god of light and is associated with the sun. Now, their industry led them to cutting down the woods around their village and digging into the mountains in order to expand outward. A displaced Ursaring with a starving family went into their village and stole some crops and attacked a villager. Whether that attack was in self-defense or not, I don't know, it doesn't say. But the Western people in this village killed her because of that attack, and then dumped her body on the edge of the village. The Ursaring's husband was a human, and he was looking for her since she had gone out for food and just never came back. And he found her with all these tools that had killed her inside of her body still, and he began crying about it, and this attracted the attention of the Westerners. And whenever they showed up, he realized that they had strange clothing, and there were tools inside of her body that were similar to the ones that they were carrying. So I immediately recognized these are the people that killed my wife. Now, he and his friends, who I am guessing are Easterners, although the story doesn't actually specify it, got increasingly angry with the Westerners as they got themselves more and more worked up about what had happened, except for the child of the man and the Ursaring, who Well, it is never specified whether the child is an Ursaring or a bear, whatever it's called, or if it's a human. I'm assuming it's a human, though. Now, because of their emotions, this seems to start to affect the land, and Ea, that moon god, leaves them and heads west, which ends up leaving the land very cold, and it describes time as slowing down in some ambiguous way. The specific text says people could not move as if time had stopped. Seeing this, the people of the East and their Pokemon forgot to mourn for the slain Ursaring. So it's a fittingly vague description like an old fable. While they headed to the western village for revenge, the child of the Ursaring and the man went to the highest mountain with his mother's corpse to mourn her there. The text goes on to say, on the other side of the forest, there were fields and many people. The people were motionless due to the cold and hunger. The people and Pokemon of the East ravaged the fields and killed the weak. The person who killed the most was the Ursaring's husband. Okay, so before, whenever it started specifying that time was slowing down and affecting people, you would think, oh, they're frozen, they can't leave. But then they leave, and I guess there's a group of villages that are in between the two main west and east villages, and those are the ones that they're attacking, but they're completely unrelated. I would also like to point out that the Ursaring went looking for food from the east village, and somehow found her way over to the west village, and she had to go through all this forested land, through multiple other villages to reach there, and we're somehow blaming the western village for ensuring that there's not enough food in the area, because they cleared out some of the woods around their little village? The logic of this is absurd, but let's just roll with it. So, the people of the east came to this apparently midpoint village that is apparently slightly closer to the west than it is to the east, I guess, but it isn't technically the west village. They go there and they kill a bunch of people there. Now, as a result, the people of the west, whose friends had been killed and had lost the fields that they had raised, were absolutely furious as a result. Now, because the westerners were now resentful, Aya, their god, left them for the east. And there was an eclipse and a drought, and fire turned things to ash, and so on. It's very comprehensive and very wordy. The child, meanwhile, has reached the summit of the mountain with his mother's body. Because it's been so long, it's been mostly decayed. But it says that her clear eyes, beautiful heart, and gentle voice still seemed alive. And we'll see this again later, look for that. A voice from above questions if he was sad or angry, and he communicates that he was not. And it questions if he wanted to see his mother again, and he does. The Ursaring's eyes, specifically, are then reborn as a ghost Pokemon named Ray, which communicates its love for the child and then leaves for the north. Now the same thing happens with the heart. A new ghost Pokemon named Eye is born and then leaves for the southwest. And then the same thing again happens with the voice. This one is called High and it leaves for the southeast. Now, the child, for the rest of the day, prays so goddamn hard that the whole world becomes engulfed by prayer. Sort of like the Hymn of the Faith from Final Fantasy X, I guess. I don't know. The two gods that were representing these villages calm down eventually, everything heals, and the two asshole human tribes both calm down as well. And because they're so grateful to the little kid, they all agree to protect the 3 lakes. I guess there are 3 lakes now. The story has not specified that until now. With these new gods, or kamis, I'm guessing is what they are. And this is, I suppose, all a setup for a new region and its legendaries, I suppose. And it goes on to describe the song that the child had sung that is now part of their local culture. Now, despite this story being an absolute mess, I had to go over it several times. I had to do notes for this video. It took me absolutely forever, because it's just... It took me a while to find them, and it also takes a while to read through them and comprehend what the hell it is that they're trying to communicate. But believe it or not, I like this, because just like an old fairy tale, or fable, or whatever, the information is kind of jumbled in a way that seems like it was something that was passed down so many times that the original intent of some of the details has been lost. So it's not really clear why some of it is even there anymore. Like in the case of mentioning that there are now 3 lakes and there was a village that was sort of in between the two of them, but it was affecting both villages, and the whole concept of them starving, even though it's something that makes no sense, because how could clearing out a small amount of woodland around one village affect anything? It all seems to harken back to there was something that happened historically, and we don't know what it is, but this is the legend that we got. I like that. I do like that. As confusing as it may be. Now, bear in mind, things to take away, once again, there is a theme of communication and harmony with nature, and also this eyes, voice, and heart motif that's going to be carried forward to some of the other stories that we're going to cover. The next story that I want to cover is the Octillary story, which I'm sure that some of you will be excited for. It is the weirdest one, in my opinion, just for the opening. One later is more problematic, but this one's just weird. So, it opens with, one day, a man is walking on the beach, and he finds an Octillary washed up on the shoreline. If you don't know what it looks like, go Google a picture of an Octillary real fast. I'll wait. It looks basically like a cartoon squid, right? Okay. The man walks on the beach and he finds one washed up on the shore. He has relations with it, as the text says, and the story says he then throws it back into the ocean, which is some interesting imagery to me. Of a man walking on the beach, finding this cartoon squid, has his way with it, then picks it up, presumably by its limbs, I guess, and throws it like a helicopter back in the ocean. Amazing. Now, the next day, he finds the same Octillary in the same place. The story doesn't give any context at all for whether it showed up looking for him, or if it washed up again accidentally, or if it was in trouble, or if it was just hanging out, or why it was even there in the first place. But anyways, the same exact situation repeats itself. He has its way with it, he finishes, and then tosses it back into the ocean again. Now, as he sleeps, the following night, the Octillary visits him in a dream, and says that it can't come to him, but she'll give him the baby that they made. So the next day, he's walking on the beach, and there's a human baby. Now, skip forward, the young man that he collected from the shore has grown up. The father dies of something unspecified, and as a result, the young man is depressed and lonely. So he goes out walking on the beach, and thankfully he doesn't find another Octillary, but he goes walking on the beach and he sees people dancing on the shoreline with swords. And as he approaches closer, he realizes that these are Sharpedos. And they all flee into the sea except for one that sort of lingers for a moment and looks behind him, and leaves a sword behind. The young man, being a young man, collects the sword and he's really fascinated with his new toy. So naturally, he goes into the forest and uses it on an Ursaring that he finds. And he first cuts its mouth, and then its eyes, and its heart. Stabs it through the chest. So again, voice, eyes, heart. And that same day, he goes on to kill 30 Ursarings in a row. So we got ourselves a little psychopath on our hands. His new hobby becomes disfiguring Pokemon. So one day he was out looking for firewood, and it got pretty late, and he found an old Ursaring in a cave, and it told him to come inside, which is something his father heard a lot, no doubt. It was late, so he did, and more people began to arrive in the cave, and he noticed that all of them were disfigured. And he started to sleep, and he started going in and out of sleep as people moved around the cave, and he heard them talking, and his perception of time seemed to slow down, from what I gather. And it says that he wakes up in spring, which indicates that since he got there in the fall, he's actually been hibernating there the entire winter. He's then sent home by the old Ursaring, and he's told that a whale lord will be near the village soon. And he says, the Ursaring says, "We will send a man. Leave the sword behind and bring a witness. Why did you do such things, cutting faces and slicing off noses?" So it's a little bit confusing. Some of that is, I guess, translation issues. But from what I can gather, it seems to be that he is being told, you're going to be held to account for the things that you've done. Look for this and make sure that you arrive unarmed. So he goes back home and recounts this to the villagers, and then they leave and set out along the beach, and they see a whale lord, and they stop there. And nearby they see a Ursa, which is the young baby form of a Ursaring, and it is scared and flees into the forest. And out of the forest, instead, comes an Ursaring, and it's storming right at them. Now, the Octillary human boy tries to pull out his sword, which he had hidden. He was not supposed to have it. But it gets stuck. So instead of surrendering, or simply throwing it down to the ground or any other thing, he decides to attack the Ursaring with his bare hands. So the two run at each other, grapple, and end up choking each other to death. The villagers that came with him watch, don't do anything presumably, and after watching them both die, they return back home and then tell that story to the village. And that's it. That's the whole story. One thing I find interesting about the story is, I mean, a lot of things, but putting aside the Octillary thing, he is half Octillary, half human, but whenever he joins with the bear in the cave, it's almost treating him as though he is a bear as well, because he starts to hibernate. As though he has unknowingly become an Ursaring without realizing it or something. Or he has changed form into one, or... it's unclear, and that's my point. It's very ethereal, and you don't really get a clear, concise view of what is happening literally. And when he's sent back, I get the impression that he's being sent back with this idea that he needs to bring witnesses so that he can be put on sort of a trial by Pokemon. And whenever he gets there, because of the fact that he showed up armed, the thing that was going to be sort of his test, which is the Ursa, immediately flees, and instead he's presented with, a more aggressive thing that is effectively himself. So the impression I get narratively is that he ends up destroying himself in the process, because he has succumbed to his loneliness and his inability to connect with the world around him, which seems to be the messaging of the fable. But that is my interpretation. Alright, so, moving on to our last story, and this definitely will be the last story because this is the problem child. This is the Typhlosion story, which is probably the one that everyone will be tuning in for. Again, I will be synopsizing it because if I just read it, it's going to be more of a problem. Now, one day a girl was out gathering firewood and she lost her way. And she, in the process of being lost, sees some Typhlosion droppings. I guess they're very recognizable, like they're very recognizably a Typhlosion dropping. Maybe they're shaped like stars or something. And she gets very anxious as a result. A handsome human man finds her and then offers for her to spend the night at his home. And it turns out his home is a cave, which would be warning sign number 1 for me, or actually probably number 2 because there's a random human out in the middle of nowhere. So he tells her to wait here and he'll go get some food. He steps outside, there's a glowing red ominous light outside, and then he comes back with some red berries. And he says, eat these, let's go to sleep now because, you can't go back home. But whenever you wake up, if I'm still asleep, don't look at my face. So, another warning sign. So she wakes up the next day and decides to, honor what she has agreed to and not risk seeing his face. And she stays there because he hasn't left the bed until she ends up falling asleep again. And when she wakes up, it coincidentally is already sundown again, so she can't get back. And the same deal happens. He goes out, gets food, ominous red light. He comes back in with green berries this time. I don't know why it specifies red and green berries, whatever. But before they eat this time, she says that she's concerned about getting home. So the man yawns and then taps her on the forehead, which might be some sort of ability or magic spell or something. But as a result, it says that she forgets her family and her home. They then eat and then go to sleep. And this keeps happening, and over time she realizes, oh, this is a Typhlosion. And in the context of the story, as far as I know, it never actually stops looking like a handsome human person. A handsome man. So this keeps going on until it becomes winter. And the Typhlosion, the human I'm guessing, is described as digging deeper into the back of the cave, and he sends her off to collect branches for firewood. But she can, because she's small, she can only get the small ones that are near the ground. And whenever she comes back with these branches, he says, that won't do. If it's not from the higher branches, humans will find us, which is kind of strange. So I'm guessing that the logic is that if she breaks low-hanging ones, if someone is walking along on a trail, it's too obvious that someone is living there, because you can look up and see that someone's been breaking them off. But if it's high up under the trees, then you're much less likely to have seen anything. So, the girl and the handsome man continue to hibernate inside of this cave, and they sometimes wake up to eat and then immediately go back to sleep. So, this entire time she's effectively just been asleep for almost all of her life. And she wakes up very briefly, and it's almost always nighttime whenever she does wake up. During one of the times that she wakes up, she realizes that she's holding a baby. So, warning sign number 53. The Typhlosion mentions that her father, her human father, is looking for her. So he'll have to go fight him to keep her as his wife. Ugh. The girl begs him not to, and says that he's a good person, which I disagree with. But she claims that he's a good person and that she will stay in this dank, dirty cave if he agrees to simply stay there and sleep and not go out looking for her father. He ends up agreeing, and they both go to sleep again. The handsome man then later wakes her and says, your father is here. Go look and see where he is. So she goes outside during a snowstorm and climbs a tree but can't make it up that high, and as a result, she breaks a low-hanging branch, from what I can tell. It's not described that way, but I'm assuming that she's trying to climb and she ends up breaking one of the branches. And this seems to make a lot of noise, I'm guessing. She returns, and the man is singing a song that she's never heard before. The Typhlosion man says that he is aware that she broke a branch, and that now he has to go fight her father when he shows up to investigate. Again, I'm assuming that he heard the branch break during the snowstorm, and that's what's going to attract him? I don't know. But he specifies that one of them will die, and he explains what to do if he's killed. Take his eyes, his voice, and his heart, build a fire where he was killed, and then burn them there, while singing the song that she just heard. And she says, don't kill my father. If anyone is to be killed, let it be you. And then he replies, goodbye, we will never meet again. So I'm not sure what that... At this point, their relationship is super weird. Obviously, but like, she seems to be communicating either that she hates the Typhlosion, or maybe at least you should be aware that what you have done is immoral, so if anyone dies, please let it be you instead. But either way, she is definitely favoring her father. But at the same time, it's almost like treating it as though they are an actual couple. This is part of the reason why people have reacted so poorly to this particular story. But anyways, goodbye, we will never meet again, is what the Typhlosion's reply is, seeming to accept the fact that he is the one that will die. Whether he has accepted knowing that she does not actually love him, or he cares enough about her to ensure that he is the one to die, I don't know. Or maybe he's saying that regardless of whether I kill your father or not, I'm gone. We just don't know. It's not specified in the story. But regardless, he goes out, they get into a fight, she hears a noise, the father kills the Typhlosion somehow, and lets her perform the rite after she explains that this thing was her husband. Which is a very reasonable father? I don't know how to describe it. It would not be my reaction, that's for sure. So she performs the rite and sings the song until the sun comes up. What this does exactly, I don't know, but it seems important to Pokemon. And as we've seen in the other stories, they seem to reincarnate specifically from their heart, eyes, and voice. So that seems to be a big part of it. There could be some cultural or, lost in translation elements to this that I don't know, but that's part of it. But the story keeps going. She, her father, and her child return home, and the father builds a hut for this girl and her child at the edge of town. And the young men of the village, who are dumbasses from what I can tell, apparently know generally what has happened to her, and they will often show up to harass her. They keep trying to take a Typhlosion pelt that they have, they just seem to have one, and they keep trying to drape it on both of them at the same time, in some attempt to mock them for being half Typhlosion, or mock her for being abducted by one. I have no idea. But she begs her parents to please stop them from doing this, because she is aware that if this pelt is draped on her, then they will fully transform into Typhlosions. I'm probably saying Typhlosion incorrectly. If you want to get angry about that, go ahead. The parents do tell the villagers to knock this off, but of course, the little dumbasses won't listen. And actually, they're even more compelled to do it after being warned not to do it, which, bonus points to the writer, is a great understanding of how dumbass behavior works. So eventually this gang of young men do manage to get the pelt on both of them, and as a result, they both howl nightmarishly and then vanish into the forest and are never seen again, presumably having turned into monsters themselves. So the village then comes to understand that Typhlosions were half-human, is what the text says. Now there's a lot to go over with this one, and allegedly I've heard that some parts of this aren't translated very well. The Japanese term for the girl seems to set her age anywhere from between the ages of 7 to 17, and supposedly the text was not translated well enough to communicate that some of this was more consensual than seems to be indicated. But even if she's 17, obviously that's still not okay. There's child abduction, implied mind control, Stockholm Syndrome, assaulting the girl's family, unwanted pregnancies. The idea that it's all mistranslated and you're really not getting the whole message, it just can't possibly be true. I will mention that the title of the story is listed as The Relationship Between Humans and Pokemon, or Human-Like Ways of Thinking. Which, I don't know. The intent of this one is really confusing to me. Because I get that it's going for the idea, again, that humans and Pokemon in this setting are interchangeable. They're actually one thing, which is something that the Pokemon franchise has communicated before. I get that part. The human-like ways of thinking part of it is very unusual. It's almost as though... I'm not trying to put words in the mouth of the writer, because the story is kind of fucked up, but it almost seems like maybe they're going for the idea of she's briefly living as though she was a Typhlosion. Because whenever she is in this haze of waking up from hibernation and then eating and going back to sleep and so on, it's as though she is thinking as though she was an animal. Because during the course of the text, it does say that at one point she realizes that she's already half Typhlosion, along with her child. Almost as though she has been in the woods so long that she has become lost to it. It's almost like in Zelda, like Ocarina of Time, someone entering the woods and then becoming a Stalfos. Or just becoming, it occurs in some of the other games as well, where they enter the forest and they become lost there, and they become one with the forest, in that sense. So it could be that they're going for that. That for that short amount of time, that's what she actually was, and she did not realize it. Because even at one point it's saying that he's digging in the back of the cave, and I'm imagining a Typhlosion doing this, like actually using its big, claws to do this. But to her, it would just look like a human doing it, which makes no sense. So it's almost this sort of interchange of her thoughts not meshing with what she actually is versus what she's seeing. Either way, the optics of the story certainly are not good at all. But regardless, those are all the stories I'm going to cover, because I just want to establish, that's not all of them, but I just want to establish the framework of what I want to talk about now. One, all of these stories are framed as fables or legends that sound like old, messed up stories. I think we can all think of one or two that are really messed up as far as things that we heard whenever we were growing up. Like, I think of the original Sleeping Beauty story, where it's not the Disney version, but in the original story, she's a named princess, starts with a Z, I think, and she falls in love with a prince and is enchanted to sleep, same as usual. And while she's asleep, he comes over there and impregnates her while she's in this coma state, and then leaves. and she gives birth while she's asleep, and the child like crawls up and gets rid of the flax that was enchanted that had put her to sleep in the first place, and then she wakes up. And after she wakes up, she finds the prince that had impregnated her, and then they get married and live happily ever after. I mean, there's a second part to the story, but it doesn't exactly cover how messed up that first part was. A lot of old fables are written to communicate the horrible reality of life for people back then. Now, I can make a whole video about that. That's a really complicated subject, about how people cope, changing values, processing trauma as a positive in some cases, or heroes really being motivated by wicked ambitions, things like that. Even like life for like my grandparents in my case, life for even my grandparents was harrowing in completely different ways than it is for me today. If I talk to my grandmother, who's still alive, she's nearing 100, she processes things in a way that I can't comprehend whenever I talk to her. Things that would really depress me just do not register with her at all, as far as she claims anyways. You just have to imagine how differently people dealt with life when they had... This is not the case of my grandmother, but like back in, like even like as recently as the 1800s or something, when people dealt with life when they had like 10 children and 4 or 5 of them just died before they were adults. It's just how it was, and you just accepted it. Like, oh, whoops, one of our kids died. Well, we still have 8 more. It's just, I mean, it's still sad, but they just process it very differently because it's just an accepted reality of everyday life for everyone around you. Or if you get sick, you might just die from it. I mean, there's no penicillin or anything, you just die. Or you're left with really major injuries that you carry with you for decades, and you just exist like that for the rest of your life, maybe in constant pain. Or, like you get a gangrene leg, no painkiller for you, just whiskey maybe, if you're lucky, and they just saw it off your body as you sit there screaming, biting down on a rag to make sure that you don't bite off your own tongue. Point being, not trying to horrify, point being, when judging fables and how screwed up they are, think about how wretched life was for a lot of people back then, and how different it was. So whenever we're looking at it through our modern lens of, oh, that isn't woke at all. No, of course it's not. What do you expect? However, with these little Pokemon things that got leaked, these are stories that were written in the past few decades. They are not ancient fables written by people in the 1300s. So, they're still meant to be in-world fables that resemble our own real-world fables. So, as a result, the reaction people have had to them has been very interesting to me. I'm not trying to be judgmental about it because I definitely understand it. I read that story and I get the same exact reaction that you do. Some people obviously are upset because they're projecting their modern values onto something that's meant to be a fable. But since they were just written, they're taking issue with the lack of modern sensibilities that are going into the writing, which is understandable. But I also think about it in this term. If it was your job to write a fictional fable like this, for some setting, whatever it is, what would it be like? Would it even feel authentic if you were doing everything in your power to avoid it being messed up in any way? Like, if it has all the modern sensibilities to it, does it really feel authentically like a real-world fable about things that happened 1,000 years ago? So, some of this is oversensitivity, although that Typhlosion story is really pushing it. Personally, I'm an artist, so I don't take fiction or drawings very seriously at all. It's something that I engage with all the time, so I'm just really desensitized to it. There's something to be said about if you have the power to draw anything, the things that you draw just don't really register with you as being a big deal. But sometimes, in the process of creation, even artists understand this. Whenever they see other art from other artists, they register, oh, he's just kidding about this, or it's more of a recognizable thing for us than it is for people that are outside of the scope of that sort of creative process. But even then, sometimes you see something and you can recognize that is a barely disguised fetish. And not even in the joke of, oh, barely disguised fetish. No, actually, it is a barely disguised fetish. And it becomes a little bit too real. And you can see that there's something there that's really messed up in the creator's head. You can just glimpse it, especially if you're an artist and you're used to doing this sort of thing. You can start to see that, and you can notice, oh, this guy actually thinks this, or he's actually into this thing. And sometimes, depending on your own sensibilities, it's very alarming. And other times, it's just sort of there. So it ends up just being enough to sort of put you off a little bit, and make you feel a little bit ill at ease. And sometimes that is intentional, in the sense of you want, if you're doing like creative writing or whatever, you do want to put the viewer into a state of unease, because that's the entire point. So sometimes, depending on your audience, you do have to go slightly overboard. It's sort of like how comics will sometimes complain, and this goes for even like comics, back in the 60s, 70s, and so on. It's not a modern thing exclusively, where sometimes they will have to go too far for a joke to register, and people will naturally get offended by it. And sometimes you just have to do that. And of course now it's a completely different problem, and that I'm not going to get into. But you can see that there's a spectrum of sort of discomfort that goes into certain kinds of crafts. And in this case, if you're making something like a Fable, that is part of that spectrum, unfortunately. But I don't think that any of these stories hit that point where even to me, I start to go, oh, this is actually some fucked up thing that is in the writer's head. It doesn't go that far. It's just sort of maybe some poor decision making here and there, which is perfectly understandable for something that was not meant to be released anyways. I mean, I've had plenty of first drafts of things that I've written where I realized, oh, I went too far with this. Like, this is not even funny, I just took this too far. Either way, probably doesn't belong in a Pokemon game either way. So, a common thread with all the stories here, this is what I really want to emphasize. In all of them, the Pokemon are obviously treated like yokai or spirits. They're not treated like animals, they're treated like ephemeral beings, like, fae or something. There's a lot of emphasis placed on eyes, voice, and heart, which might be something very specific to Japanese culture, I don't know. But my takeaway is that it's how you perceive the world, how you interact with it, and what you really are internally. Eyes, voice, heart. With the whole Pokemon-human marriage thing that people love to meme about, the point is obviously that all life is interchangeable. It's more of a Eastern idea, but it's there in the West as well, that we're all connected and that everything affects us and vice versa. We affect everything around us as well. The Fables are written in sort of a very hazy way with non-specific details and lost information. Like with the Octillary story, its child becomes a human, but is gifted the potential for violence by a sort of kin from the ocean that are a different species. And then it goes on to possibly become a different species before basically destroying itself. But what we actually perceive is that it's still a human the entire time. So whether other humans see it as being human or something else, it may vary depending on the circumstances. Like, it's very ephemeral. Also at the same time, like a whale lord is presented almost like a presiding governing force to observe, like a huge whale lord. And the Ursarings, as this sort of bear thing creature, are presented as a force of contention to represent the boy being at war with himself and the world around him. Like, each of the Pokemon, they are not literally like a bear species, a whale species, or whatever. They are forces, they're presences. In Pokemon, the further you go back in time, in this world, the more the species really aren't biological species in the sense. They're manifestations or they're aspects of things that are living in the world and what they tend to embody. The species transition from each other based on what's happened to them and whether there's other life that is caring for them or respecting them. Like, one thing will die and then become a completely different thing. It just depends on the circumstances around them. So that's part of how I see it. Another interesting part of this sort of discussion comes from how people in the real world view Pokemon in general. It sort of resembles the problem that's actually in the game's actual lore. A lot of people resent sexualizing the designs for a lot of reasons, understandable ones. One is that they want to view the Pokemon as sort of house pets that can technically understand English. That's how they like to view them. That's part of the cute factor for them, and it's a very comfortable sort of relationship. Basically just the same one that you have with your pets, except it's even greater because, hey, they understand English. It's great. Some of it also is the association of Pokemon as a game with your childhood. So incorporating anything adult into it, whether it's, sexual or like doing taxes or something, whatever adult you want to imagine, that infringes on that for them. And it makes them resent the fact that you're doing it, because it's supposed to be something that is securely fixed as part of their childhood. Other people do the opposite, and they will actually carry the childhood things that they had when they were a kid forward into adulthood by trying to make them more adults. Sonic characters are a great example of this. They're these weird, doofy, little bulbous designs that get sexualized all the time. It's just part of the culture surrounding the series. Because people grew up with it, and as a result, they carry that forward, and as they develop, they want the thing that they enjoy to develop as well. Or, people that take characters from shows, whatever, and then they give them some sort of new sexual identity, or they change their design, or put them into relationships within one another, shipping, and so on. Or they just keep iterating on the idea of the character until it just becomes an original character. It just transforms entirely into something completely different. And sometimes as they grow up, they'll start making their own things, and it'll just become a completely new IP. This is part of development. So, it doesn't surprise me that a lot of people are, quote-unquote outraged or try to ignore the Pokemon marriage lore in Pokemon. They hate that idea because they want them to be, these cute animals, or they want their childhood to be secure, and they associate that with adulthood. Like Ursaring to them is a space bear. It's not a mystical form of yokai life that embodies the wilderness and the ferocity of cohabitating with nature itself. That's not what it is to them. It's just a bear. What Gamefreak is clearly going for whenever they start trying to touch upon this sort of stuff, with Pokemon-human marriage or whatever, is not a guy literally dressing up in a tuxedo with a bear in a wedding dress. It's this old-fashioned, foggy view of the past where the lines between reality, the spiritual, and perception are all blurred together. It's why some Pokemon are trash bags or sets of keys or chandeliers. They're yokai. They're concepts that are manifesting in reality. So whenever they're saying that humans and Pokemon were one and the same and they intermarried and stuff, they're meaning that in the most literal sense, that all life is the same thing and they're interchanging with one another. It's not a Pikachu in lingerie on its honeymoon. Considering this makes me want to imagine a version of Pokemon where the designs are less cutesy mascots or even animals. It's less capturing animals to fight one another for fun, and it's more like a spooky game of encountering problems in the world and then trying to solve them. It'd be like entering a haunted house, and because of some violence that happened there's a smoky, poorly defined creature there that takes forms based on how you treat and respect it, with no clearly right answer. Like, you treat it too well, maybe it manifests in a more hostile way. Maybe if you treat it poorly, it also manifests in a hostile way. Maybe there's no right answers. Maybe it responds positively no matter what because it simply wants the interaction, and the way that it looks ends up depending on your actions and so on. Part of why I like the idea of malleable designs, instead of the very rigidly defined ones, is related to this. Just the idea that it can be anything, and it just depends on what your personal touch in the world happens to be. But you can't make cute mascots out of horrifying realities. So there's probably a reason why these are all cut ideas that don't actually exist in the games. They aren't cut for being inappropriate so much as they're cut for not matching the marketable tone of what the IP is now. You can see the intent behind them that shows how the company internally views the setting. Pokemon is a post-mythical world where humans have forgotten that these are yokai creatures and have cohabitated with them as animals, and part of their modern industrious lives and problems and so on. It feels like someone has allowed moldable clay to harden into something mundane, but pleasant and inoffensive. That's what the modern Pokemon world feels like to me. So whenever they touch back on that and want to talk about the very distant past, of course it feels very, I guess, tainted in comparison. So the Professor Harkness-style jokes exist because it is a juxtaposition. The sugary wholesomeness of Pokemon against the reality of how the universe would absolutely have to work if it was a real universe. It's sort of like talking about Star Trek's universe, where it just doesn't make any sense the more you go into it. Where does the food in Pokemon come from? Where do all these hundreds of eggs that you create to make a competitive Pokemon end up going to? Do the Pokemon age? Do they die? Are people really living together with these things and just treat them all like pet dogs, even though they're sapient? Don't worry about it. Enjoy your Pikachu. Give him a light ball. That's a good item. Now, people are absolutely going to town on their Lopunnies. You kidding me? Much like how I started with one drawing and then deleted it, not all content made for something makes the cut. I decided in this drawing that I didn't like the pose too much, and I wanted to see if I could fit a more interesting and dynamic pose into the same space, even if I had to use a 16:9 ratio instead of a 9:16 ratio. After I noticed how much negative space that they had left over, I decided to add in the other poll participants, just because. So as a result, the picture ended up taking 16 hours to complete, which is why it's a little bit messy. If you're wondering about my shading and strokes and so on, I tried to keep it as simple as possible, so I would not be at it for the next 2 weeks trying to get it done. I'm trying to make content that I can monetize here. Which maybe, now that I think about it, maybe I won't even be able to do. I tried to post the picture to my Discord, and my own Discord blocked the picture because it recognized that it was just too saucy. But anyway, people love to see cut content as intended content that they need to add back into the game. But it's not. In most cases, early concepts are just a random idea someone jotted down in a couple of minutes, or just a failed concept, and they decided that they did not like it and they wanted to go a different direction. Then YouTubers will find it and focus on it and make up a story about how it was the original intent of the game, even though it was just a thumbnail someone jotted down in like 2 seconds. Often, content doesn't make it in because they realize it just doesn't need to be there. Now my original Lopunny, my original intent is lost to time, woe is me. I will mention that I looked up, in the process of creating the image, some unfiltered search results on Bing for pose ideas, even though I didn't overtly use one in particular. And I will tell you, I was stone-faced the entire time. Artists don't draw these things with boners. For creators, it's usually, like I was saying earlier, it's just totally meaningless. They know the intent and how to craft it, but it's something that almost exclusively affects the consumer, not the creator. When you make something, you have to imagine how it affects the person that's viewing it. In this case, they made a lot of things and decided fables like this weren't the kinds of things their product needed for the type of people engaging with it, which was probably the right call. Although, I find this internal conceptualization of Pokemon history to be way more interesting than the schlock that we see in the games and the anime. And it's not because someone unloaded himself into an octopus that came back for seconds, or whatever the hell was happening there. It's because it's a strange ethereal world where thought and action seem to manifest in the people that live in it. And I find that to be very interesting. Although obviously I'm not the type to be bothered by having my childhood ruined. I don't see Pokemon as house cats that I train for combat, and they're just super cool with it. Frankly, I don't really care about the games at all. I'm, just a pervert that can mildly profit off Lopunny's big round butt. I'll also point out that the poll got over 12,000 votes. And I can only remember about 2, maybe 3 comments objecting to me having the poll at all. We can all pretend that we're aghast, but the reality is most people don't care, or they're mildly amused, and that's probably it. Anyways, I hope that I added a little bit more to the discussion beyond just childhood ruined. And hopefully my picture did not ruin your childhood for you as well. Maybe you and your Sylveon are getting married next week, I don't know. It's none of my business. Anyways, be critical, be kind. I will see you guys next time.